I'm going to go about this in a weird way as usual. There are two, maybe three, certainly two giant coaching jobs that I think are on the radar for new coaches. These are giant college coaching jobs. And I got to tell you, sometimes I feel like, am I the only one kind of looking out for them? Am I the only one slightly concerned about where they are? Because I don't like it. I don't think it's good for the game. These are programs that have to get it right. They're in a hurry to make sure they get it right. And I don't think I'm being dramatic by saying that. They're not hiring yet. They don't have new coaches yet. They haven't even hinted they're looking yet. But if I were running any of these programs, it's certainly two. I can make a pretty decent argument for three, but two for sure. If I were running any of these programs, I'd be very, very aware that you're sliding into a deep, dark funk. And it's entirely possible that if you don't pivot and get things fixed in your program in a world of 4 conferences and an expanded playoff and giant money and all the stuff that comes with it, if you continue to slide, you continue to slip up, you continue to be mediocre at best, it is entirely possible you just sort of slip away. I often use Nebraska as the example in college football of, they're kind of screwed because of where they are, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But to think that if you're a powerhouse, it can't happen to you, I always point out, look at Nebraska. These programs, you can think about who it could be, and I know this is a winding way to get to something that I think is pretty interesting, and I do think it's going to be on the table, but these programs might, even this year, which I think is kind of dangerous too, they might even be able to be they might hide their flaws and how bad off they really are because of easy schedules. Now I want you to keep that setup in mind. Surely it's pretty obvious of who I'm thinking about. So I say all that because it's all I could take away from the reading and watching a little bit about the Netflix series. This is the Untold series that is so good. This one is called Swamp Kings, and it's a new documentary about the Florida football program under Urban Meyer. And they won back-to-back championships. The more I read and the clips that I see, I can't help. I can't help it. I can't help but think about where he is, where his head is, and what about Oklahoma and A&M? Huh? Oh, Jeff, are you saying you know? I'm not saying I know. I'm just setting this up for you because I don't think it's a stretch. I think we've got an interesting setup here. It may not come together, but I think we have an interesting setup. I'll take it further. I'm surprised Urban Meyer is not the head coach at Texas. I am. I'm not even quite sure I know why. I don't know why. I don't know that you know why. Could it be, he said for years about his health, oh my health, but he always complains about his health and then takes another job a month later. So I don't know if that's it. There's baggage. Oh my, there's baggage. Would that have stopped Texas? I don't think so. I'm not sure. I'm just surprised. I'm slightly surprised he is not currently the head coach of Texas. But if you're wondering why I'd even mention them, A&M and Oklahoma, and talking about a documentary about the Florida football program, which is pretty fascinating, I'd suggest that you put the pieces together. I wonder aloud if Urban Meyer coaches again. Now, I want you to think about that. So it's called Swamp Kings. The intro is cool. And of course, look, if there's ever going to be a documentary, if you're going to do a documentary about anybody, everyone involved is going to be a mess.
College football in the South is way bigger than professional sports.
When you come to Florida, football is the world here.
Everything is win or loser.
Anything less than winning a national title, you're a failure.
1, 2, 3, showdown!
Florida was not winning. The feeling was that getting Urban Meyer, Florida could restore what they had lost.
I needed to build this team.
Urban said, I'm going to treat my superstars like superstars, and I'm going to treat my like
They was training like we was going to Iraq.
It was unmerciful.
Our front seven, they didn't try to hit you. They tried to hurt you. And we were the number one team in the country.
They walk around like the kings of campus, and that took over.
Called it Gaines Vegas. In Gaines Vegas, we party. It's just too much temptation.
Another Florida Gator has been arrested.
We never got police reports. It ended up just getting fixed.
You had never seen a team that was undefeated be so miserable.
People do not know what it's like to give so much to something.
For the rest of our lives.
That it's everything.
I mean, that involves two of the most interesting characters in college sports of the last couple of decades. Tim Tebow, who will go down as one of the best college players. I think he's one of the three best and most dominant college players of all time. Stop there. Don't do this thing where you go, but he flamed out of the NFL. He didn't have game for the NFL. I used to say it all the time, and we get screamed at. That it was something about religion. Could care less. And the NFL could care less. It doesn't matter. He was one of the most dominant college players of all time. The Urban Meyer, Tim Tebow, I know this is going to sound weird, but I'm going to give you a comparison. Their careers and their issues, and I know Tebow didn't have many, but I'm just saying it was just so high profile, so talked about, so debated, the two of them. They remind me in a weird way of Barry Switzer and Brian Bosworth. That's pre-social media. Absolute rock stars. And it just comes apart. The business of college football, which is just slimy, you have no idea how slimy it is. You don't. I don't think you really want to know. But these documentaries do a pretty decent job. But I tell you what, you can't be a star in college sports very long because it does eat you up. One, the people involved are not very good at being stars. Two, you got to be pretty sketchy to succeed. And sooner or later, that catches up with you. So it's just got a short shelf life as a superstar college player and a superstar college coach. But they do. They remind me, Tebow and Urban Meyer remind me of the rock star status of Barry Switzer and Brian Bosworth. You know, Brian Bosworth was, if you don't know him, Google him, was the first controversial pre-social media, my gosh, I can't even imagine what it would have been like during social media. Pre-social media rock star that took on a life of its own, became a legend, became a myth, became all these superstar qualities, and then it sort of ate them up. The story of Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow, to an extent, kind of reminds me of that, certainly with Urban Meyer. But let me get back to the whole point of this guy's coaching record. Okay? Urban Meyer and Nick Saban are the two most successful college coaches of, if we want to call the modern era, we're going to say the past 25 years. And it's not even close. Okay? So we have Saban and Urban Meyer. They're on one ledge. Okay? There's no one else on that ledge. The next step down on the next ledge would probably be Bob Stoops. It would probably be Mac Brown. It would be Brian Kelly, who coached at Notre Dame, who's at LSU now. It would be Chip Kelly and probably Bill Snyder from Kansas State. Now, I mean, that's fine if you want to debate that stuff too. But I'm just saying Urban Meyer and Nick Saban have owned the game and flipped programs, not just flipping programs to, boy, they went from mediocre to pretty good at Utah. I'm talking about turning them into championship programs in no time. Both of them have done it. Both of them have done it in a way that can't be touched by anybody else in the modern era. Now, there's another step down probably from, the groups that I mentioned. I mean, again, you can add names if you want, but I do think it's Saban and Meyer on one, and then Bob Stoops, Mac Brown, Brian Kelly, Chip Kelly, Bill Snyder. Then you take another step down and you get to guys that are relatively newer, Lincoln Riley, Sonny Dykes, that kind of thing. So here's his storyline and the success. And I do want to circle it all the way back to what I think is, I don't believe the guy's done with coaching. I don't. I'm not sure that he needs to be. Now, again, I have no inside scoop. I'm just saying that this resume is ridiculous. Oh, there's baggage, but the resume is absolutely ridiculous. And I keep thinking, and every time I hear that clip, every time I think about that program, I think about him, and I think about his track record, and then I can't help but think of A&M and Oklahoma and think they are set up. I think they are on the cusp of having to turn to someone like Urban Meyer. Just what I think. And I think they're crazy not to be priming themselves for it. Crazy. Now, with it becomes all this other interesting stuff, right? Again, sort of like Barry Switzer's ending. In college football, it's rare that it ends politely and quietly and nicely. It usually ends in a dumpster fire, okay? That's the way the college game ends. You win a few championships, we know what's coming down the road, and that is we're going to find out you were a train wreck. It's the way the story almost always goes, and with Urban Meyer, it's train wreck extreme. The record is absurd. I think you judge really, really good coaches, particularly in college, because the NFL is a completely different game altogether. In college, the coach matters even more. And in college football, you can judge people on taking over a program, fixing it, flipping it. And Urban Meyer has done it at a remarkable rate. It really is remarkable. What he and Saban have done, they go to places and they go from 6-6 to 12-0, and then they win championships. It's like clockwork. So just some details about this guy's career. He's won 85% of his games, won 2 national championships at Florida, 1 more at Ohio State. He would have won another Ohio State had they been eligible for one. He went undefeated another year. I started at Bowling Green. This is to give you an example of what this guy can do to a program. No, we're not to the dumpster fire yet, but this is what he can do. Coaches at Bowling Green. Next thing you know, Bowling Green, it's the biggest turnaround in NCAA football, and I believe he won 8 games in his first season at Bowling Green. Then he goes to Utah. No one cares, right? 10-2, they win their first league championship since 1957. He goes to Utah in his second year. They go 12-0. He also coaches the first pick in the NFL draft at Utah before Utah mattered. In his second season at Florida, they go 13-1. They beat Arkansas for the SEC championship. They win a national championship. They blast Ohio State 41-14, their first championship since 96. That's his second year at Florida. Then Tim Tebow, of course, becomes the first sophomore and third Florida player ever to win the Heisman Trophy. They have a 13-win season in 2008. They win 11 games by more than 20 points. I believe it's one of the most dominant seasons of all time in college football. Let's see, they beat Oklahoma, blasted them in a championship game. He won his second national championship in his first 3 years there. And then he announces that he's stepping down. So this is where you start to get that weird drama, all the issues that come with him. But this is true for the most part of rock stars in college sports. They're kind of a mess. But this guy can fix your program, and he can fix it in a hurry, and you win. Now, you're going to have baggage in the end, but you're going to win. You're going to win in a big way. So then he announces he's going to step down at Florida, his family and health and family and all this stuff. He won his 100th game. He became the 6th fastest coach in NCAA history to reach 100 wins fastest. He resigns at Florida. Health, family. Need to spend more time with my family. My health is a concern. Okay? Now, this is the way it plays out. He's leaving. That place turns into it's a dumpster fire. So then, he takes the Ohio State job. Oh, okay. They went 12-0, but were ineligible to play for a championship. Then, of course, they go on and win a championship there, and then he steps down at Ohio State. He wins 12 games in each of his first 2 seasons at Ohio State. They went 14-1. They beat Wisconsin 59-0 to win the Big Ten. They beat Alabama, who was then number 1 in the Sugar Bowl. They beat Oregon in the national championship. He joins Nick Saban as the only coaches to win national championships at 2 schools. That's what he does, and that's what he does fast, and that's why I mentioned Oklahoma and A&M. I think it would be impossible not to make the call if and when it comes around, and I do think it's going to come around. He's at Ohio State. He's placed on administrative leave because how he handled, i.e. covered up, an investigation into the employment of a receivers coach who was accused, in pretty great detail, of domestic violence. That wasn't handled well at all. It was an ugly story. The way it was handled was even uglier. The New York Times reports that 41 of players who played on Meyer's 2008 Florida team were either arrested while in college or shortly thereafter, sometimes both, including a double murderer. The stories go, the documentary, a lot of it is about those guys. It's about the crazy stuff that went on. It's about the baggage. It's about the ugliness. At Ohio State, Sooners, Aggies, he goes 82-9. He was 7-0 against Michigan, which is how you're judged, which is the right way it should be. You always judge yourself on light competition in college football. You don't judge coaches on what they do against Rice and the others. It's not the way to handle it. So the track record is just ridiculous. Then health, family, that kind of storyline. Then he goes to Jacksonville and he flames out in a terrible way. I mean, they can't stand him. It was a terrible fit for the NFL. But just because you flame out in the NFL does not mean you can't run a college program. I mean, I think they're completely different setups. They're completely different scenarios. His MO doesn't work in the NFL, obviously. But if you want to fix things and you want the guy to fix it right away and win right away, that's the guy. There's nobody else other than Saban that can do it. I'm not saying it's going to be full of choir boys by any stretch, but most rich alumni, particularly after they've been burned by people like Jimbo Fisher or a hire of Brent Venables or something like that, they don't care. The A&M and Oklahoma program, in my opinion, now I do think it's going to be hidden. I think you're worse than you realize this year. I know it's not going to be received very well, but your faults and you're going to overvalue the quality of your program by an easy schedule. I would say the same thing about Texas. I don't think you're quite as good as you really should be. So just keep that in mind. I don't know if they're going to whack any of these guys, but if they whack their coach, and I think it should be on the table, this guy's obviously what you would do. He's going to fix you. In 2 years, you're going to be fixed. In 2 years, you're going to play for a championship. Now, in 4 years, you're going to find out somebody's been murdered and all this other stuff. But in 2 years, the track record is you're going to play for a championship. So the fact that he flames out, or anybody for that matter, Nick Saban didn't do very well in the NFL. Jimmy Johnson succeeded because of a brilliant trade. I mean, look, had Dallas not found an NFL team dumb enough to serve up multiple talented players and draft picks for Herschel Walker, it would have taken Jimmy Johnson a long time to pull it off. I mean, the fact is that, and again, I'm not diminishing his coaching ability, and he was built for the NFL. Urban Meyer is not. Nick Saban is probably not. Barry Switzer is probably not. These guys that are dictators that only know the dictator kind of way, it doesn't work in the NFL. Jimmy Johnson was an exception, but he was an exception because of a miraculous and idiotic trade by the Minnesota Vikings. So I don't think if somebody wants to fire back at me and say, oh, what are you talking about, Jeff? I mean, the guy flamed out in Jacksonville. Night and day, completely different. He wouldn't flame out in College Station. He wouldn't flame out in Norman, Oklahoma. I can tell you that much. We know it because the track record is there. So, but then you get to the documentary, which is going to be ugly. You know, when you have double murderers, it's kind of an issue. And he's aired out his problems too. But I don't know that I quite buy. I'm not sure I buy that a guy that has been as successful as him, and he works for, who does he work for? Fox Sports now? I don't even know if he's any good. I honestly, I don't know that I've heard him. But I don't know that a guy that has that kind of resume and that kind of track record, that just knows how to fix a program, that knows how to turn it on a dime, unlike anybody but Saban. I don't know how a guy ends without one more try. I don't know how, honestly. I don't know how. If Oklahoma called or A&M called or Texas called, I'm not quite sure I know how he could say no. Because you got to believe he doesn't like the Jacksonville flameout sticking to him. Now, his ego may be such that he's going to find a blame somewhere else, but he can't feel good. He's got to think. Like everybody, he's got to think there's one more fix in me. One more. If I were A&M or Oklahoma or Texas, I'd think about it. I would assume he has one more fix in him. But here are his problems, which he apparently goes into great detail on the show, and that's fine. And I'm not denying this. All right, the next part of this on Untold, Swamp Kings. He says, we go in the locker room, and I remember grabbing my phone, locking the door. I can hear the players celebrating. This is when they won a national championship. And I'm texting recruits, worried about the next class. You won 2 national championships out of 3 years. This was an expectation now, he says. An expectation we have to win it next year, and then we have to win it the year after that. Anything less than winning a national championship, and you're a complete failure, he says. He was in a really, quote, really bad place for a long time. I lost weight. I became addicted to Ambien. I couldn't sleep. I'd take Ambien and drink when I wasn't working. It got to the point where I had to take 2 Ambien and drink beer on top of it just to get 4 hours of sleep. I'd have those moments where I would just sit there and start sweating, shaking. It was a panic attack. Like, something's going on here. We're not ready. We're not ready. I felt like I was a failure, I think because they didn't win the national championship in the second year or third year he was there. He says, I felt like I was a failure. I was in a deep depression. I couldn't get out of bed. I had no energy. I had no desire. I thought I was going to die. I'm sure all that's true too. I mean, I don't know that his, I don't know that his problems that he talked about often when he would leave a place, right? I mean, that was the same story. My health is too bad. I need to get out. He leaves. The program starts to crumble a little bit. And we know the storyline. So I'm not saying he wasn't unhealthy. I'm not saying he wasn't struggling. So I'm thinking of, the questions, of course, are this. Would he and will you? Will he and will you? I'm thinking of A&M and Oklahoma. If you make a coaching draft board, and don't pretend for a second, you are crazy and naive if you don't think you're in a sketchy place. That Oklahoma thing, and I know coaches love to do this. And look, if you want to be a fan and a face painter, then get away for a few minutes because you're not going to like what I'm saying. But if you're really judging your program, college football does not have parity. Don't buy it. It doesn't. There's no excuse to suck at A&M, Oklahoma, or Texas. No excuse. You have an excuse not to win a championship regularly. You have no excuse to suck. No way. You don't have an excuse to be mediocre at those programs. No excuse whatsoever. Got it? Anybody that finds an excuse, you're really nice and you're a real face painter or you're in the coaching profession. So, I think they're on notice. I think they should be on notice. Because what happened at Oklahoma was a train wreck last year. Brent Venables tries to spin it by saying we were in a bunch of games. You were in it in games against unlike competition. That's not how you're measured. You're measured against the best. And against the best, you have been absolutely run off the field. You were a non-factor. You were an embarrassment. It can't be tolerated. So, yeah, they got a cream puff schedule. They turn around and Texas lights them up again, you've got problems there. And I would say the exact same thing about Texas. Texas has such an easy schedule. If Steve Sarkisian doesn't win 8, I'm going to start the Urban Meyer conversation about Texas. Absolutely. Because where you are in the landscape of the college game, you can't wait very long. Texas can maybe get away with it more than others, but certainly for Oklahoma, you can't suck your first 2 years in the SEC. Ask A&M how that's working out. So I think these programs have to be on the Urban Meyer watch. I don't know if he would do it, and I don't know if they would. But think of it this way. If you make a college coaching draft board, I don't know, a goofy way of looking at it. I don't have a draft board, but I got a wall behind me with some graffiti on it. But if you make a college football draft board, the top 2 on the board right now, because I think the days of pro guys going to college is over. You know, there was a time when I thought, you could take somebody like Kyle Shanahan, who played at Texas, that I think you could talk to a guy like that and say, your family gets to come back to Austin. You make all the money you've ever wanted. Life is easy. I think at a time that might appeal to someone like him, a younger, successful NFL coach. But in this time period of NIL, where it's just not really coaching, it's more finding bagmen is basically what the college game has turned into. All you do is suck up to 17-year-olds. That can't be appealing to an NFL coach. So I'm out of the belief. I thought Texas should have hired John Harbaugh a few years ago because I think pro guys are better coaches. But I just don't know if that option's for you. So if you take that off the table, that you can't convince an successful NFL coach to come to your college program, then the draft board is really small. The draft board, I think, the top 2 picks on your draft board, play along with me all you want. I think the top 2 picks on the college coaching draft board are Urban Meyer and Sonny Dykes. Give me another option. And don't say some guy at some 1AA program or something. It's not the same. Those are 2 instant fixes. With Urban Meyer, you know exactly what's going to happen. You know it. He runs over everyone. You give him a giant check. Next thing you know, you're playing for a championship. Next thing you know, you're in a lot of trouble, but you're going to play for a championship. Sonny Dykes is a much nicer, decent version. But you want to fix yourself, you get Urban Meyer. And I wonder if there's more coaching in him. I find it hard to believe he's done. So if you say, and that's the board. I think for someone like A&M, Oklahoma, and Texas, I think you have 2 picks. I think you better be aware that you might have to make a pick, and I think you need to be aware you might have to make it pretty quickly. Now you're going to say, but Jeff, they have coaches already. They're going to win 7 or 8 games. I'm going to say, shut your face. Really? Tell me the quality competition they're going to beat. Tell me the big-time programs, A&M, Oklahoma, and maybe Texas, because they don't play any. But tell me who it is they're going to beat if you want to fairly judge these guys. Both A&M and Oklahoma, in my opinion, are in dangerous spots. And that's because you judge a big-time program on how it does against like competition, not unlike competition. You judge them on how they do against those that are similar. You judge them on how they do against powerhouses. That's what Urban Meyer did at Ohio State. He went 7-0 against Michigan. That's how you're judged. You're at Oklahoma or Texas, you are judged on how you do against each other, period. And that's the way it should be. So I don't know that he's on the draft board. I don't know. He's a little bit like, he's a more modern version of Lou Holtz. Right? Ask Notre Dame how that goes. Oh, all of a sudden you're fixed, and all of a sudden you're successful, and then all of a sudden it gets dirty and sketchy every time. So he's the modern version of that, except even better, because you aren't just going to improve your record with Urban Meyer. You're going to play for a trophy. You're not just going to flip it and go from 5 or 6 wins to 9. You're going to go for 5 or 6 wins to playing for a championship really quickly. And then a few years later, when he says his head hurts or his chest hurts or he wants to spend time with his family, you're going to look around and go, oh, no, now we got the baggage.